If I ask you to picture the world's most famous sword, what comes to mind? For many people, the answer is immediate: the Japanese Katana. Its graceful curve, the polished steel, the distinctive wrapped handle, it's become one of the most recognizable weapons in history. It appears in Hollywood films, anime, video games, museums, and private collections around the world. Even people who know almost nothing about Japan can recognize a katana on sight. Now, let me ask a different question. Can you picture a famous type of European sword? Not Excalibur, the legendary sword of King Arthur. I mean a real historical weapon. Most people struggle. That's a little strange, isn't it? For well over 1,000 years, Europe produced extraordinary swords. Viking blades crossed the North Atlantic. Knightly longswords fought in the Crusades. Rapiers became symbols of Renaissance nobility. Some European master swordsmiths created blades every bit as sophisticated as those made in Japan. So, why is it that one sword became a worldwide cultural icon, while the others remained largely in the interests of historians and collectors? The answer has surprisingly little to do with which sword was better. Instead, it's a story about geography, technology, mythology, and perhaps most importantly, storytelling. To understand why the katana became so famous, we first have to look at the material from which it was made. Japan has never been rich in high-quality iron ore. Unlike parts of Europe where large deposits of relatively pure iron could be mined, much of Japan's usable iron came from iron sand collected from rivers and mountain streams. For sword making, it wasn't ideal. The raw material contained impurities that made producing reliable steel much more difficult. Japanese swordsmiths couldn't simply melt everything together and expect a strong blade to emerge. They had to work with what they had. That's where one of history's most remarkable metallurgical traditions developed. The steel used for traditional Japanese swords, known as Tamahagane, was produced in a clay furnace called a Tatara. Over several days, iron sand and charcoal were carefully layered and heated until a bloom of steel formed inside the furnace. But not all of that steel was equal. Some pieces contained more carbon than others. Some were brittle, others were too soft. Instead of throwing imperfect steel away, Japanese smiths learned how to combine different grades together, selecting the best pieces and forging them into a blade that balanced hardness with flexibility. This is where one of the biggest myths begins. You've probably heard that Japanese swords were folded hundreds, even thousands of times to make them stronger. There is some truth in that, but the real story is a bit more interesting. Traditional swordsmiths folded the steel because the raw material they started with was uneven in quality. Each fold helped distribute impurities, even out the carbon content, and create a more reliable blade. In other words, folding wasn't a magical technique that created super steel. It was an ingenious solution to a difficult material. The katana's legendary combination of sharpness and resilience came just as much from another process, combining steels of different hardness and carefully heat-treating the blade so that the edge became exceptionally hard while the spine remained tougher and more flexible. That's what allowed the sword to hold a keen edge without becoming as brittle as glass. If a European blacksmith had been given the same iron sand, he likely would have developed similar techniques. Likewise, if a Japanese swordsmith had access to the high-quality steel available in parts of medieval Europe, he probably wouldn't have needed to fold the steel nearly as much. It's a wonderful example of human ingenuity. Different craftsmen, facing different problems, arrived at different solutions. European swords had to survive different battlefields. A medieval knight wasn't usually fighting an opponent wearing silk robes or lightly protected armor. He was facing men covered in chainmail, helmets, and eventually full suits of plate armor. Against that kind of protection, slicing alone wasn't enough. European swords evolved into weapons designed not only to cut, but also to thrust, grapple, and even strike with the crossguard or pommel. Longsword manuals from Germany and Italy read almost like martial arts textbooks, teaching techniques that would surprise anyone who thinks medieval combat consisted of simply swinging a sword as hard as possible. The swords of Europe reflected these realities. Many were straight, because a straight blade excels at thrusting. Many were broader, because they needed durability. And many were used alongside shields, daggers, or polearms as part of a complete fighting system. So, neither the Japanese nor the European tradition was inherently superior. They were answering completely different questions. If you spent any time online, you've probably come across some extraordinary claims about the katana. That it would slice through the barrel of a machine gun, or cut through solid steel, or even split another sword cleanly in half without damaging its own edge. These stories are entertaining, but they're also a good reminder of how legends grow over time. The truth is that the katana was an exceptional weapon, but it was still a weapon built within the limits of physics. Its greatest strength wasn't that it could cut through anything. Its greatest strength was that it was beautifully suited to the kind of combat Japanese warriors actually fought. Most samurai battles did not resemble the elegant one-on-one duels we've seen in countless films. Medieval warfare in Japan was chaotic, brutal, and often fought with bows, spears, and later firearms. In fact, during many periods of Japanese history, the spear was a far more common battlefield weapon than the sword. The sword was important, but it was rarely the first weapon drawn. So why has it become the symbol of the samurai? Part of the answer lies in what happened after Japan's great age of warfare came to an end. Beginning in the early 1600s, Japan entered the Edo Period, an era of remarkable peace that lasted for more than 250 years. With few large-scale wars to fight, many samurai gradually transformed from warriors into administrators, scholars, and government officials. Yet they continued to wear their swords. Over time, the sword changed from being simply a practical weapon into something much more powerful, a symbol of identity. Only members of the samurai class were permitted to wear the paired long and short swords, known as the daisho. Walking through a town with those swords at your side immediately announced your social status. The blade became a visible reminder of honor, duty, and family lineage. It also became an object of extraordinary craftsmanship. Swordsmiths spent months creating a single blade. Scabbards were lacquered by master artisans. Handles were wrapped with incredible precision. Decorative fittings became works of art in their own right. A fine sword wasn't just a weapon, it was something to be admired, something to be inherited, and something that connected generations of the same family. By the 19th century, the katana had become deeply woven into Japan's cultural identity. Ironically, this happened just as swords were becoming obsolete on the battlefield. In 1868, Japan changed almost overnight. The Meiji Restoration brought rapid industrialization, modern armies, railways, factories, and Western technology. The government wanted to build a modern nation, and that meant reducing the political power of the samurai. In 1876, a law known as the Haitore Edict prohibited most people from wearing swords in public. For centuries, the sword had been a symbol of status, and suddenly, it wasn't. Many swordsmiths found themselves without customers. Some turned to making farming tools or kitchen knives just to survive. Others abandoned the trade entirely. If history had ended there, the katana might have become little more than a museum piece. But history had other plans. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan began introducing its culture to the wider world. International exhibitions displayed Japanese art, ceramics, lacquerware, and swords to fascinated audiences in Europe and America. Collectors were captivated. Unlike European swords, which many Westerners viewed as relics of their own medieval past, Japanese swords felt mysterious and exotic. Their curved shape was unfamiliar. Their elegant fittings were often unlike anything seen in European armories. Even the visible grain of the folded steel seemed almost magical to people who didn't understand how it had been made. An interest in Japanese art exploded, and so did interest in Japanese swords. Museums began displaying them not only as weapons, but as masterpieces of craftsmanship. And then something else happened that no medieval swordsmith could ever have imagined. Cinema arrived. When Japanese filmmakers wanted to tell stories about honor, revenge, sacrifice, and loyalty, the samurai became the perfect heroes. Directors such as Akira Kurosawa created films that transformed the image of the samurai into something timeless. Movies like The Seven Samurai weren't simply successful in Japan, they changed filmmaking around the world. Western directors studied Kurosawa's camera work, storytelling, and action scenes. His influence can still be seen today in everything from westerns to science fiction. As audiences fell in love with samurai stories, they also fell in love with the sword that those warriors carried. And soon the katana appeared in Hollywood films, then comic books, then anime, and then video games. Generation after generation grew up seeing the katana not simply as a weapon, but as the weapon of the disciplined warrior. Meanwhile, European swords rarely enjoyed the same treatment. Knights certainly appeared in films, but their swords usually played a supporting role. The samurai's sword, by contrast, often became a character in its own right. What do these weapons tell us about the societies that created them? Today, traditional Japanese swordsmiths continue to forge blades using techniques passed down through generations, but their work is valued less as a weapon than as an art form. The same is increasingly true of Europe's finest swords. Both are appreciated not for their ability to win battles, but for the history, craftsmanship, and culture they represent. So why did the katana become the world's most famous sword? Not because it was unquestionably superior, but because it became the face of one of history's most enduring warrior traditions. The sword itself is an extraordinary piece of engineering, but its greatest legacy is the story it came to represent. Sometimes history doesn't remember an object simply because it was the best, it remembers the one that captured people's imagination. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you liked this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone you think might be interested in anything about Japan. Thanks, and see you next time.